I, Matteo Bellini, humble vendor of books and keeper of dust, write these words, though I do not know who will read them. Perhaps none. Perhaps all men, if any, survive this ruin. If these words endure, let them serve as witness to the night eternity died. Rome had always seemed beyond ruin, urbs aeterna, the eternal city. So I had read, so I had believed, and so we all lived, half certain the hand of God would forever cradle her. She had endured fire, sack, and pestilence. Yet the day of her true undoing dawned not in flame from without, but in corruption from within. It began with trembling, as though the world itself had drawn breath and now sought to exhale destruction. I had just shuttered my shop upon the Via Giulia when the ground beneath my feet stirred like water troubled by a stone. Bottles toppled, and the shelves gave forth a groan as though weary of their centuries of service. And then, the bells. Not one, nor a scattered few, but all. From the humblest parish bell in Trastevere to the brazen voice of St. Peter's, each began to toll of its own accord. They clamored not in harmony, but in terror, as though each metal tongue sought to outcry the next. Never have I heard such cacophony. It was not the song of man, but the scream of stone. The citizens halted in their tracks. I saw a fishmonger drop his basket, trout spilling to the stones. A nursemaid clutched her charge, eyes wide with fright. An old soldier of the last wars, hardened by shot and blade, sank to his knees, mouthing prayers with pale lips. Then silence. The stillness after the bells was worse than their din. It was as though the air itself had grown heavy, suffocating, thick as the air of a sealed tomb. And then, the Vatican bled. I raised my eyes eastward. St. Peter's loomed, bathed in moonlight. Yet the light was wrong. It was crimson, living as of blood seeping from an invisible wound. Veins of scarlet fire traced across the stones of the dome, pulsing, throbbing, as though it were become a great heart. A low roar filled the air. It was neither wind nor thunder, but something vast, awakening. From the crown of the basilica leapt a torrent of fire that tore the heavens as parchment. Stars drowned in blood. And from that wound in the firmament began a rain, not of water nor fire, but of silver. At first they seemed as hail, tinkling against the eaves and tiles, rolling along the cobblestones. I stooped to behold one where it struck at my feet. It was a coin, ancient, worn smooth by ages, yet its face still bore the proud profile of emperors. The silver was darkened, as though it had passed through smoke, and yet when I touched it, the cold of it bit my flesh as frost. The crowd marveled. Some laughed, others, greedy, gathered handfuls. A boy cried in delight, "Heaven rains treasure," and filled his pockets. Then came the first scream. A woman clutched her hand. Where the coin had kissed her skin, a thing had grown, not wound, not bruise, but a mouth, small, wet, and human. It whispered, lips writhing like a leech. Others shrieked as mouths blossomed upon them, in palms, upon arms, at their throats. Tiny mouths with gleaming teeth muttering in unison. 30, 30, 30, the cursed number, the price of betrayal. Panic seized the square. Men clawed their skin raw to tear the mouths away, only to birth new ones. Others fell to the ground in fits, muttering the word in a frenzy until their tongues grew black. I myself felt one kiss my cheek, and with trembling fingers I plucked the coin away ere it rooted. Then came the shapes. From the wound in the heavens drifted not only coins but shadows. They did not fall like men, but descended like smoke made flesh. At first I thought them angels blackened by fire, until one drew close. It bore the semblance of a woman, fair and pale, yet its face was wrong. Too long, too slack, as though the skin were a mask ill-fitted. Its mouth gaped and loosed a wail like a babe left upon cold stones. Others joined it, their lament a dirge that pierced the marrow. The crowd scattered. Some fell in worship, mistaking them for visions divine. The wretches were the first to die, for the creatures bent low and kissed them. Their mouths never closed again, stretched wide in soundless screams as the life was drawn from them. I fled, as did many, though many more fell. Down narrow streets I ran, clutching nothing but the small cross about my neck. The night was chaos, the air thick with ash, the ground alive with trembling, and always the rain of coins. Their tinkling became like the laughter of 1,000 demons. At last I stumbled upon a gathering of souls who yet lived. A nurse, Lucia, she named herself, clutching her apron to staunch the bleeding of a wounded man. A priest, young and thin, Father Tommaso, his eyes alight with terror and yet with faith burning still. A father with a child upon his shoulders, both sobbing. Others too, nameless, drawn together as sheep before wolves. We beheld one another not as friends, nor yet as enemies, but as fellow condemned. For in that hour, all of Rome was a single flock hounded by devils. We resolved to flee toward the Tiber, thinking the water might deliver us from fire. The nurse urged haste, the father prayed aloud, the priest muttered litanies in Latin. I followed, though my legs quaked. Behind us, Rome screamed. The creatures wailed, the coins whispered, and the dome of St. Peter's pulsed ever brighter, like the heart of hell itself. Thus began our passage through the vale of misery. We pressed into the night, though each step was treachery. The stones themselves seemed to writhe with unseen life, and more than once the father stumbled, clutching his child lest she be spilled upon the cursed earth. The air was thick, clotting in the throat, and reeked of iron, as though the very sky had become a wound unstaunched. Through narrow streets we passed, half lit by torches guttering in the foul wind. I knew these ways as well as the lines of my hand, yet under that bleeding sky they seemed no longer mine. The grocer's stall where I oft purchased figs lay overturned, its fruits blackened as though long rotted. The fountain at the crossroads, where once children laughed and splashed, now ran red with water that was not water. Lucia, the nurse, moved with a fierce resolve, her eyes darting to every alley. Her white habit, already sullied with blood, marked her like a beacon, and yet she did not shrink. Father Tommaso clutched his breviary as a soldier would his sword, muttering prayers so quickly the words near tripped one another. The father with the child, Pietro, I later learned his name, lagged, for the little girl clung to his neck and wept unceasingly. It was her sobbing that first drew them. From the corner of a street, there emerged a sound unlike any I had heard. Not the wail of the mournful shapes that drifted from the wound above, nor yet the muttering of the coin-born, but a clicking like nails upon glass. We froze. The sound drew closer, and then it came into sight. It crawled upon all fours, though its limbs were too long, jointed in ways that mocked the order of flesh. Its body was gaunt, almost skeletal, its skin pale and stretched thin. Where eyes should have been were only pits, wet and glistening. Yet it moved unerringly, head twitching toward the sound of the child's sobs. Lucia clapped her hand over the girl's mouth, but too late. The thing leapt. I confess I knew only terror. Yet Tommaso, frail as he seemed, stepped before us, raising his crucifix. His voice cracked but did not falter as he cried, "Vei retro, Satana." The creature halted, its body quivering as though in torment. Yet it did not flee. It crouched low, limbs trembling, as though mocking prayer with its posture. Then, with a sound like laughter twisted into a shriek, it scuttled back into the shadows, vanishing into the alley from whence it came. We dared not linger. We hastened our steps, the stones now slippery with the rain of coins. Each fell with a tinkling that scraped the nerves raw. Pietro cursed them, kicking them aside as he went, but I could not help but see how they seemed to gather, not scattered, but as though creeping toward us of their own will. At last we reached the river. The Tiber flowed dark and swollen, churning as though the earth's bowels poured into it. Bridges spanned it still, though crowds of fleeing souls pressed upon them desperate to cross. But the bridges were death. Upon the Ponte Sant'Angelo we saw them, the mourners. They hovered above the stone, their faces pale masks of sorrow, their arms outstretched. Men and women who sought to cross were seized, embraced in their cold arms. Those who resisted found their flesh peeled from them as though garments, their screams joining the wail of the damned. We turned from the bridge, seeking another way, but every crossing was the same. Above each stood shadows, keening, reaping. The river, once a passage of life, was now a moat of despair. Pietro fell to his knees, the child clutched against his breast and sobbed, "There is no escape. The city is damned." And in truth, it seemed so. Lucia lifted him by the shoulder with a strength not her own. "While we draw breath, we fight. Do not blaspheme before your daughter." Her voice rang sharp, like steel. It was then the priest spoke, low and trembling. "This is no plague of chance. I have heard whispers in the sacristy, murmurs of an old watch kept by the Holy See. They spoke of a custos, a guardian set over a relic most foul. Bones, cursed bones, the bones of Judas himself. I thought them but legends, tales to frighten novices, yet now—" He gestured toward the bleeding dome of St. Peter's. The word struck me as a hammer. Judas, the betrayer, the accursed. If indeed his bones were unearthed, if indeed they had been kept, and now profaned, what evil might not flow from them? Our company looked one to another, stricken silent. For in our hearts we knew, this was no mere calamity of earth, nor yet the wrath of heaven. This was hell itself, breached and unbound. Even as we spoke, the air quivered with a new cry. Not human, nor yet holy beast. It rolled across the waters like a tide of anguish, shaking the very stones. Shadows gathered upon the far bank, writhing, multiplying. Their forms stretched, twisting in shapes that mocked God's creation. We turned from the river, fleeing deeper into the city, though hope fled from us. Down alleys slick with blood and coin, past statues that wept tears of black pitch, through markets where corpses sat upright as though awaiting purchase. We stumbled, half dead with fear. At last, broken and gasping, we found refuge within a church. San Giovanni dei Fiorentini, whose doors yet stood unbroken. Within was darkness save for the pale glow of votive candles. The air was thick with incense, long burned to ash. We barred the doors, though we knew not if wood might keep at bay such things. The pews stood empty. Upon the altar lay no host, no chalice, but a scattering of coins. They gleamed in the candlelight, whispering softly. We dared not touch them. The priest fell to his knees before the altar, praying in Latin, his voice thin but unyielding. Lucia tended the wounded, though her hands shook. Pietro cradled his daughter, rocking her though she slept not, her eyes open and glassy as though beholding things unseen. I sat apart, my back to the wall, my hand upon the small cross that had been my father's. My heart beat slow, heavy as though counting the last measures of life. And then I heard it, a voice, soft, tender, my mother's voice, though she had been dead these 10 years. It spoke my name, Matteo. The hairs upon my flesh rose. I turned, and in the shadowed pews beheld a shape, pale, slight, with eyes too large and a mouth that curved in sorrow. "Matteo," it said again, though the lips scarce moved, "come." We huddled within the church as though its walls were the ribs of a great beast, holding us in a fragile cage of stone. The air was thick and warm, rank with the mingled odors of smoke and sweat and incense long faded. We dared not unbar the doors, though every soul among us longed to flee. From without came the world's death throes. At first only distant cries, sharp, sudden, soon cut short. Then the rolling thunder of feet across cobbles, the mad clamor of bells, rung by no hand of man. A voice rose, ragged, crying miserere nobis, before it was torn into silence. We pressed our backs against the wood, feeling it shudder as something vast passed close by in the street. Its tread was not of hoof nor foot, but as though iron claws raked the stones. Lucia, ever stalwart, closed her eyes and mouthed prayers, though her lips bled where she bit them to keep from crying aloud. The candles quivered in their sockets. Smoke curled thick about the rafters, though no fire we kindled. And still the sounds grew. A shriek high as a babe's, yet stretched long until it became a wail unearthly. A tearing like cloth riven, though no cloth was near. A pounding of wings, or were they drums? The very earth beneath us groaned, as though Rome herself labored in torment. The child, little Sophia, began to keen not loudly, but in a thin, unbroken note. Her eyes stared wide, pupils swallowed black, unblinking. Pietro clutched her, weeping, begging her to cease, yet she only gazed toward the altar as though seeing what none else could. It was then we heard the coins. They shifted where they lay, clinking softly in the silence between screams. None touched them, yet they moved, rolling across the marble, drawing near one another as filings to a magnet. I swear I saw one leap, striking another, as though eager to join its kin. "Cover them," whispered Father Tommaso, his voice cracked. Lucia hastened to sweep a cloth across the altar, yet when she reached forth, her hand hovered, trembling. The coins gleamed with a light not their own, pale as moon upon water, and whispered. Though none else stirred, I heard my name, Matteo, sliding over the air as though carried on breath unseen. The nurse snatched her hand back, face pale. "They speak." The priest seized the cloth himself, his fingers shaking as he cast it over the pile. Yet still the faint chiming sounded beneath the linen, restless, like teeth grinding in sleep. We dared not speak long, lest our voices draw notice from what prowled without. Yet silence brought no peace, for the world pressed against our walls. Flames licked unseen in the distance, their glow faint through the high windows. The air tasted of ash. The shrieks came nearer, followed by a low, guttural moan that seemed to rise from 1,000 throats at once. Once, something struck the wall outside with such force the mortar dust rained from the rafters. Then silence. A silence deeper than death, heavy as the tomb. We scarcely breathed. Pietro held his daughter close, covering her ears, though still her lips moved in whispers none dared hear. The hush was broken by song. Soft at first, as though from the lips of children, rising sweet and high. A hymn I knew, sung often at vespers, Ave Maris Stella, but the words faltered, twisted. The voices grew too many, their tones sour, until the song was but a mockery, laughter in the shape of praise. Lucia pressed her hands to her ears, but it sounded within as much as without. Tommaso wept openly, his crucifix clutched so hard it drew blood from his palm. I, too, nearly broke, for in the midst of that chorus I heard once more the voice of my mother, dead these 10 years, calling my name. It was not memory, I swear it was her, speaking as she did when I was a boy. I longed to answer, to cry out, but I saw then a shadow pass across the high window, vast and winged, and knew if I gave my voice, it would hear. The hymn ended in a peal of laughter that split the night. Then came a sound as of many feet, running swift past our refuge. The screams rose anew in the city. The world outside was consumed in fire and lamentation, yet we remained in our fragile ark of stone, adrift upon a sea of torment. When at last the noise lessened, the priest spoke, his words a whisper barely carried to our ears. This cannot be endured. It is not chance nor wrath sent blind. It is wrought by man's folly. The relic is the root, the bones of the traitor. I have heard of him who watched over them, custos, a guardian. If he has fallen, or worse, if he has broken faith, the city is undone. Lucia turned to him, fierce despite her trembling. Then we must seek this relic. If it be the cause, perhaps it may be undone. Pietro shook his head wildly. You speak of madness. The streets are filled with death. We cannot even cross to the river. The priest laid a hand upon the man's shoulder, his eyes hollow but resolute. We are lost regardless, unless the wound is closed. Would you see your child live among such things? The man was silent, his tears falling upon the girl's pale hair. I looked upon them, and upon the shrouded coins that shifted still beneath the linen. My heart was lead, my limbs weak, yet within me a spark stirred. Hope or folly I knew not, for the priest spoke truth. To hide was but to await the jaws. To act was despair's only defiance. And so, though my voice quavered, I said, then we must find Custos, or what remains of him. The others looked upon me with eyes hollowed by dread, yet none gainsaid me. And outside, the night wailed on. The decision to leave was not reached in haste, nor in peace. The hours bled one into another within that darkened nave, while the voices of the damned swept past our walls as a sea about a rock. None among us found sleep, though we closed our eyes and feigned it. The child whispered still, her lips pale and cracked, though her father held her tight against his breast. At last, as dawn should have risen, the light did not come. Instead, the narrow windows showed only a deep red haze, as of embers choked in ash. When I beheld it, I knew the sun was lost to us. The world would not turn aright again unless we dared. It was Father Tommaso who at last stood, swaying like a reed. His face was drawn, yet his eyes burned with a fire I had not seen in him before. "We go," he said, his voice soft but sure. Lucia crossed herself. Pietro cursed, clutching his daughter as if to sink into the stones. I felt no courage swell in me, but the words of the priest struck like a bell. If we tarried, the city's jaws would close about us. We gathered what little we had, no bread, no water, only the cross from the altar and the iron candlesticks, wrenched from their bases, a pitiful armament against hell's brood. When at last the great doors were unbarred, the hinges shrieked as though they wept. A breath of air swept in, hot, thick, and rank with the stench of smoke and carrion. Rome lay before us in ruin. The street was strewn with rubble, the stones blackened with fire. Shards of glass glimmered like ice, reflecting the red haze. Above, the sky swirled not with clouds but with shapes half seen, wings that turned too sharply, bodies that twisted wrong in the murk. Yet it was the silence that crushed us most. No voices, no bells, no hoofs, only the crackle of flame and the distant sobbing of some creature not man. We moved swiftly, keeping close to the walls. The priest led, cross in hand. Lucia bore the candlestick as a spear, her face set grim. Pietro staggered with his child, whose eyes shone wide as moons. I walked rearmost, turning off to be sure no shadow crept behind. We had not gone 100 paces when we saw the first of them. It crouched in the doorway of a ruined shop, its limbs long as a hound's, its back bent grotesque. The flesh was not flesh but ash and char, cracked and glowing faintly as embers. When it raised its head, its face was that of a woman I once knew, a neighbor, though her mouth was sewn with coins, her eyes wide and unblinking. She or it watched us pass, and though it stirred not, a sound issued from her throat. Not speech, but the grinding of metal on metal, like coins turned in a bowl. We dared not linger. Further along we came upon the bridge, or what remained of it. The span was broken midway, stones dropped into the river below, where the water frothed black and stinking. Along the rail lay bodies, or what once were. Some were hollow, their chests gaping, as though something had burrowed within and left them husks. Others yet moved, writhing though their entrails spilled upon the stones, whispering prayers in tongues I did not know. Pietro began to retch, his daughter whimpering against his shoulder. From beneath the bridge came a sound, slow, deliberate, as of many claws striking stone. We fled before it grew near. The city twisted as we went. Streets that I had walked each day now bent upon themselves, leading us astray. Walls bore symbols seared deep, circles broken with nails, words in a tongue that burned the eyes. At times we heard footsteps close behind, but when we turned, only shadows leapt along the walls. It was near the Forum that we heard the wailing. From a wide square rose voices beyond number, crying as one. We crept near, though our hearts begged flight, and beheld the mourners. They were many, gathered in a great circle, their bodies robed in tatters, their faces pale, though each was a face of one beloved. I saw my mother among them, Pietro his wife, Lucia her brother. Father Tommaso fell to his knees, for he beheld there a boy he named with a sob. The hosts swayed, their voices rising in lament so piercing it drove nails through the mind. One by one they turned their heads toward us, and as they did, the cry became laughter. The priest cried out and lifted his cross, yet the laughter only deepened. The host parted, as though to make way, and from their midst stepped a figure tall and cloaked, bearing in his hand a chain of gold coins that rattled like bones. The priest gasped and whispered, "Custos." I knew then that our path had indeed led us true, but not to salvation. For what walked toward us bore not the countenance of a man, but the mask of one who had bartered his soul. The figure advanced with slow, deliberate steps, and the coins in his hand clinked with each sway of the chain. Though cloaked in darkness, I glimpsed what lay beneath. The cloth stirred as though alive, shifting over shoulders too broad, arms too long. His gait was not human, though he stood upon two legs. When he drew near, the air grew heavy. My lungs labored as though the world itself pressed upon my chest. Pietro fell to his knees, clutching his daughter as though to shield her from sight. Lucia muttered the Ave beneath her breath, yet her voice faltered, the words twisting into sobs. Father Tommaso alone stood firm, though his lips trembled. "In the name of Christ," he said, raising the cross high, "depart from us." The figure halted, his head inclined as though in mockery, and a voice issued forth, not from his mouth, for no lips moved, but from the clinking coins that swayed upon his chain. "Depart?" the voice said. It was not one voice, but many, men, women, children, rising and falling in unison, each syllable like iron struck upon stone. "And to where shall you depart, child of dust? The earth is sealed, the sky is barred, only one path remains, and it is through me." The priest's hand shook, but he did not lower the cross. "Who are you?" he demanded. The laughter that followed was low, like the rumble of stones dragged across a tomb. The coins shivered as though struck by a hidden wind. "You name me already," the voice replied. "I am Custos, guardian, keeper of the 30, warden of the betrayer's flesh." At those words my blood froze, for I had heard in whispers at the market of the relics the church kept hidden, relics not shown to the faithful, bones blackened by sin, sealed in caskets of stone. I had dismissed them as fables, yet here before me stood their keeper. Lucia wept openly now, covering her face with her hands. Pietro rocked his daughter, murmuring prayers that faltered into nonsense. The figure stepped closer still. The laughter ceased and the voices softened, curling like smoke. "I was charged to guard the bones, the marrow of the one who sold the Son of Man. For 30 pieces he opened the gate, and for 30 I sealed it again. But now the gate is rent, and you walk within the breach. Tell me, do you not feel it? The breath of damnation upon your skin." And indeed, as he spoke, I felt it. The air against my flesh was no longer air, but a hand, cold and grasping. My skin prickled and I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Father Tommaso swayed, yet did not fall. "If you are guardian, then why loose this evil upon us? Why torment the children of Rome?" For a moment there was silence. The figure bowed his head and the coins stilled. Then the voices spoke again, softer now, almost tender. "I was deceived, as was Judas before me. I was given charge, yet my charge was a chain, and I the chained. He whispered to me in the dark, promising freedom. He showed me visions of fire and dominion. I sought to bind him tighter, but the binding was a door, and in closing it, I opened it. The voices cracked then, and among them I heard weeping. True or feigned I knew not. The priest staggered back, horror plain upon his face. You betrayed us." The laughter rose once more, sharp and cruel. "As he betrayed him, as all must betray in time. Betrayal is the coin with which eternity is bought." The figure raised the chain, and as the coins struck one another, sparks leapt, though no fire was near. The mourners around him shrieked in joy, their faces splitting into grotesque smiles, their lament turning to a cacophony of mirth. Pietro clapped his hands over his daughter's ears, but the sound pierced through all barriers. I felt it in my bones, rattling within me like dice in a cup. The figure leaned forward then, his hood falling back. I beheld a face that was not one face, but many, shifting, melding, breaking apart. At one moment it was a man's, hollow-eyed and scarred. Then it was a child's, with lips sewn shut by thread of gold. Then it was my own, pale and wide-eyed, staring back at me with horror. I stumbled, nearly falling. The world spun and bile rose in my throat. The voice came again, this time not aloud but within my mind. "Matteo," it whispered, using my name, the sound curling through my thoughts like a worm. "You will serve me well." The sound of my name in that multitude of voices tore what strength remained in me. My knees weakened, and I staggered back into Lucia, who clutched at my sleeve, her own face white as marble. "Run," Father Tommaso hissed, his voice hoarse with terror. His eyes never left the shifting visage before us, yet he lowered the cross just enough to seize Pietro by the shoulder. "Take your child. Go." The command broke whatever spell bound us. Pietro rose in an instant, his daughter clinging to his neck, and stumbled toward the broken archway that led to the street. Lucia followed, dragging me along. My limbs moved as if through water, every step an agony, but fear drove me forward. Behind us, the chains struck once more, and the coins clattered together with a sound like shattering glass. The mourners howled, Their keening turned to shrieks of delight, and I knew they had been loosed. We fled into the forum. The open space stretched before us, once a place of gathering, now a graveyard of fire and ruin. Columns toppled, statues split, stones blackened, as though scorched from within. The ground itself seemed to writhe beneath our feet, cracks glowing faintly with some inner heat. And the mourners came. They poured from the archway like a tide, pale figures moving with impossible swiftness, their mouths torn wide in mirthless grins. Some ran upon hands and feet, others upon twisted limbs that bent wrong. Their laughter echoed, mingling with the distant screams of the city. "Faster!" Tommaso cried, pulling me forward as I stumbled. "The river. We must reach the river." We ran down the ancient stones, our steps ringing against the broken marble. Pietro's child whimpered against his shoulder, but he did not slow. Lucia's breath came ragged, her hand clamped hard upon my arm. The mourners gained ground. Their feet made no sound upon the stones, yet I felt their presence behind me, their shadows stretching long across the broken square. One darted past, pale and swift, its face twisted into the likeness of a man I had known from the market, his throat still bruised from the noose by which he had hanged himself years before. I cried out and stumbled, and the thing leapt toward me. Its fingers grazed my sleeve, cold as iron, but Tommaso swung the crucifix with sudden strength, striking its skull. A hiss escaped its mouth, and the face melted into another, an infant's, shrieking with laughter. Then it fell back, clawing at its own flesh as smoke poured from its eyes. We reached the far end of the forum, where the steps descended toward the river road. Flames licked the air above the distant bridge, and I saw dark shapes moving there, too many to count, yet there was no other path. "Down!" Tommaso urged, waving us on. We stumbled down the steps, our feet slipping on ash and rubble. The mourners pursued, their numbers growing with each breath. From alleys and shadows they came, their forms ever changing, their mouths spilling both laughter and weeping. One seized Lucia's hair from behind, yanking her backward. She screamed, clawing at its arm. Its face shifted rapidly, her mother, her brother, her own likeness with eyes gouged out. I turned, grasping a stone from the ground, and struck its skull. It wailed, but did not loose her. Then Pietro, with a desperate cry, swung the heavy satchel he bore. The creature's head cracked against the stones, and it dissolved into smoke that reeked of sulfur. Lucia fell against me, sobbing, but we dared not pause. We ran toward the bridge. The flames grew taller, and the stench of burning flesh filled my lungs. Shapes writhed upon the stones there, bodies torn open, faces gnawed to bone. Among them moved the crawlers, black-limbed things with eyeless heads, their bodies jerking with unnatural spasms as they tore at the dead. The sight froze me where I stood. "There," Tommaso pointed, not toward the bridge but toward a narrow stair that led down to the riverbank. "We must cross below." We stumbled toward it, the stones slick with blood. The mourners were near upon us now. I could feel their cold breath at my neck, hear their voices whispering my name in many tongues. Pietro reached the stair first, half sliding down its worn steps. I followed, dragging Lucia. Tommaso came last, his crucifix raised high, the mourners pressing upon him like waves against a rock. At the bottom lay the Tiber, black and swollen, its waters reflecting the fire above. The current was swift, churning with debris. "We must wade it," Tommaso said, his chest heaving. "Better to be taken by the river than by them." But as he spoke, a cry rose behind us, terrible and triumphant. I looked back, and there, upon the broken arch at the forum's edge, stood Custos. His hood was cast back, his shifting face gleaming in the firelight, his chain held high. The coins rang together, and the sound was like thunder. The mourners shrieked in one voice and surged forward. The river roared below us, swollen beyond its banks, a churning black torrent that caught the light of the fires above and reflected them in shattered fragments. The air stank of rot and sulfur, as though some wound had been opened beneath the earth and now bled its poison into the stream. Pietro was first to plunge down the last stones, clutching his daughter to his chest. "Hold fast to me," he cried, though his voice was already swallowed by the roar. He waded into the shallows, the water lapping against his knees, then his waist. The child clung tighter, her face buried against his neck. Lucia and I followed, stumbling across the slick rocks. The current pulled at my legs with a strength that seemed greater than mere water. It pressed against my chest as though some vast hand sought to draw me beneath. My every step was a battle, my breath ragged, yet still I clung to Lucia's arm and she to mine. Behind us came Tommaso, the crucifix raised, his eyes never leaving Custos upon the arch. The sound of the coins rang out again, echoing across the stones. The mourners poured down the stair, their pale faces grinning, their limbs bending like reeds in the wind. "Into the river," Tommaso bellowed, his voice breaking. "Do not look back. Into the river, or all is lost." The waters swallowed my waist, my chest, rising to my throat. The cold bit deep, yet beneath it was a heat unnatural, as though the river boiled with unseen fires. It whispered at my skin, tugging, pressing, seeking to draw me further down. And in its voice I heard the clink of coin, the rustle of silver pieces falling into hollow hands. Pietro staggered ahead, his daughter still clutched fast. The current struck him sideways, and for a moment I feared he would fall. But he pressed on, his teeth bared, his eyes wild with desperate fury. Lucia cried out, her hand slipping from mine as the current dragged her back. I seized her wrist, pulling with all the strength left in me, and she gasped as the water closed over her mouth. Her eyes widened, and for an instant I saw faces in the depths beneath her, pale and weeping, their hands reaching upward from the dark. The mourners entered the river behind us. They did not fight the current, nor did it seem to hinder them. They glided across the surface like corpses borne by the tide, their mouths open in silent laughter. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting fire and coin alike. "Keep your eyes above," Tommaso cried, his voice ragged. He thrust the crucifix into the air, and for a moment its light seemed to press them back, the waters around it churning white. Yet still they came, their pale arms outstretched. I felt hands brush my legs, cold, skeletal. I kicked, flailing, and the grip loosed. But others came, clutching from below. The river teemed with them, unseen mouths grazing my skin, unseen whispers filling my ears. 30 for silver, 30 for blood. Lucia screamed, and I turned to see a face rising from the water before her. It was her own face, pale and rotted, lips split wide in a grin. It spoke in her voice, yet the words were in no tongue I knew, and blood poured from its mouth as it laughed. She struck at it, and the vision shattered like mist, yet her cry lingered, echoing across the river. Pietro reached the far bank first. With a final heave, he dragged himself onto the stones, coughing, his daughter clutched still to his breast. She wept softly, yet still breathed. I followed, pulling Lucia beside me. We scrambled onto the bank, our bodies trembling with cold, our lungs burning. Behind us the water churned, white with movement. Tommaso came last. He waited, the crucifix still raised high, his lips moving in prayers too broken for me to hear. The mourners pressed close about him, their faces shifting, their mouths spitting curses. They clawed at his robes, their nails tearing fabric, yet still he pressed forward. Then Custos moved. From the arch he descended, not walking but gliding, the chain clutched in his hand. The coins rang with every step, and the sound carried across the river like thunder. The waters answered. They rose, swelling upward as though in obedience, forming a dark wave that loomed above Tommaso. Faces writhed within it, countless faces weeping and laughing, their mouths spilling coins that sank back into the depths. "Tommaso!" I cried, reaching out my hand. He turned, and for a moment I saw his face clearly in the firelight. His eyes shone with something not of this world. Fear, yes, but also defiance. "In manus tuas domine," he whispered. And then the wave fell. The river swallowed him whole. The crucifix was torn from his hand, spinning upward before it sank beneath the black water. His cry was lost in the roar. The mourners shrieked in triumph, their voices echoing across the ruins. We three lay upon the far bank, shuddering, watching as the river closed once more. No sign of Tommaso remained, only the dark current rushing on, swollen with the faces of the dead. And above it all, upon the broken bridge, Custos stood with his chain raised, the coins gleaming red in the firelight. His shifting face turned toward us, and though his lips did not move, the words filled my mind as though whispered at my ear. "You cannot flee what has already claimed you." We did not rise at once. The river's roar held us in place, its dark waters gliding past as though nothing had transpired within them. My body shook with cold, yet I dared not move, for fear the very act of standing might draw the river's gaze again. Lucia knelt upon the stones, her hair clinging wet to her face. She stared at the black current as though she might wrest Tommaso back from it by sight alone. Her lips moved, but no sound came, save a thin keening that barely reached my ear. Pietro crouched a little way off, his daughter pressed tight to him. She whimpered, her voice hoarse from smoke and terror. He hushed her with trembling words, though his eyes never left the water. There was no solace in them, only the emptiness of a man who had seen too much. The river shifted. A pale hand broke the surface not far from shore, its fingers curled as though grasping for light. Then another. Then another. They rose in silence, countless hands thrust upward, their skin mottled and rotted, their nails cracked and blackened. They writhed together, reaching toward the night sky, toward us, toward anything beyond their prison. From the depths came wails, not the cries of men, but the voices of children, of women, of priests and beggars alike. They mingled in discordant chorus, their agony folding upon itself until the very stones beneath us seemed to tremble. The child clutched Pietro's neck tighter and shrieked. He pressed her face against his chest and muttered prayers, but I heard how the words broke. Lucia gripped my sleeve with sudden force, her eyes wide and shining, fixed upon the water. "Do you see them?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked again. Faces drifted within the current, pale and eyeless, turning slowly as the water bore them on. One face lifted from the rest, rising half above the surface, its mouth opening as though to draw breath. The water spilled from its lips, but its voice reached me clear as a bell. "Matteo." The sound struck me like a blade. My mother's voice, gentle, weary, the same tone she had used in my boyhood when calling me to table. I staggered back, clutching my head as though to shield myself from it. "No," I gasped. "No, you are not she." Lucia shuddered. "They speak to me also," she whispered. "Voices I knew. Names, I hear names. Pietro turned toward us, his face stark in the firelight. They will draw us back if we linger. We must leave this place. The river, it is not for the living. He rose, though his limbs shook, and gathered his child closer. If Tommaso has perished, God keep him. But if we stay, we follow him into the depths. I staggered to my feet, every muscle heavy as stone. My gaze drifted once more to the river. The hands had sunk beneath the current, but the faces remained, carried onward by the tide. Their mouths still moved, forming words I could not hear. And above them, still upon the bridge, Custos lingered. His form was dark against the flames, yet the chain glimmered red. Though the river lay between us, his presence pressed upon me, a weight heavy as the earth. His shifting face turned once more toward us, and though his lips did not part, I felt the whisper again in my marrow. You cannot flee what has already claimed you. We turned from the bank then, though every step seemed treachery against Tommaso's memory. The ruins of the city loomed before us, cloaked in smoke and flame, and the night wailed with the cries of those still pursued. We went forward into that ruin, and the river carried its dead behind us.